everyone. I'm Natukunda, as they've introduced me already. And first of all, I would love to thank the Nigerian Bird Atlas Project for for inviting me and also giving me the opportunity to share my research findings with you all. I'll be talking about the papyrus guardians saving a wetland with rare birds. And this is based on my MSc research and my ongoing conservation work. I did my MSc from Kabale University, and I'll go straight away with the main issue. Now, the big question here is how do persuade the world that a place is worth saving? Sometimes we find that the best advocates are the rare birds that call it home. And here I mean the wetland that I'll be talking about. But in the end, it is the people, it's me and you who are the true guardians. So join me as I share the story of Rushebe Kanyabaha wetland, which is a Ugandan wetland and where science, strategy, and community action meet to save a unique ecosystem. So birds and people are more than biodiversity. First of all, you'd be wondering why the birds. Number one, birds are birds generate a lot of money through bird watching, and this generates millions of dollars annually. They provide so many ecosystem services. For example, they help in pest control, seed dispersal, and pollination. And also, they feature in so many local traditions and cultures. So that is why it is very important to conserve these birds because they support both nature and people's well-being. So why the study? First of all, I would like to enlighten you that I did my study in a wetland and I used birds as a proxy for other biodiversity because birds are usually indicators of a healthy ecosystem. So, why the study is that papyrus wetlands are disappearing due to farming, herbicides, and settlements. However, little scientific evidence existed to prove their global significance. So, my research aimed to generate baseline data to support the wetlands recognition as a key biodiversity area. So, this is the place where I collected my data. It is called Rushebe Kanyabaha wetland, which is found in the southwestern part of Uganda. And most of it is entirely a papyrus wetland. It has mostly papyrus vegetation. And why this specific wetland is worth saving, or similar wetlands, especially those with papyrus vegetation, is that it is a haven for unique wildlife. Usually, these papyrus wetlands are a home to rare papyrus endemic birds found nowhere else in the world. Yet, the wetlands help in controlling floods, storing carbon, and also regulating climate. And moreover, these wetlands support community livelihoods through the fisheries and agriculture. However, the wetland is under threat because of habitat destruction, which is endangering the species like the papyrus yellow warbler, which is of global concern. So if we lose such wetlands, it means that we are losing an entire ecosystem. So my the main objective of my study was to assess whether this wetland meets key biodiversity area criteria, and my focus was on 6 papyrus endemic birds with special attention to the papyrus yellow warbler due to its global conservation importance. And basically with these birds, um, I was supposed to correlate them with habitat quality, human disturbance, and their abundance. So the approach that was used for this study was that 138 point counts were carried out across 43.3 kilometers of the wetland, and I used a standard 10 minutes bird count at each point of data collection. And of course, on rare occasions, callbacks were used to make sure that all the birds within the wetland were well recorded. And at every point, a GPS was used to map and track the locations where the birds were found. And identification of other birds was also used using regional guidebooks. So basically, this is a pictorial of how I collected the data, measuring 250 meters between each point, and then using GPS to map the location of the birds. Then for me to see the birds, I used the binoculars, a pair of binoculars, to observe the bird, and also hearing the birds within the 10 minutes that were timed, and the guidebook for accurate identification. So what did I find out? These were the following. I found out the following. So out of 953 observations around the study area, I found out that the white-winged swamp warblers were 34.4% of the total observations. And maybe before sharing the findings is that these are the 6 species that I concentrated on because they are endemic to the papyrus vegetation and they cannot live anywhere else without that kind of vegetation. So the white-winged swamp warbler was recorded highest with 34.4%. Those were 328 bird species. Then followed by the greater swamp warblers, which were 215. Then followed by Carythus cisticola, which catered for 15.8% of the total observations. And then I had the Papyrus gonolex, which catered for 14%. Then we had the Papyrus yellow warbler, which is of global concern. These ones were 111. And according to the global population of between 10,000 to 19,000, these birds had over 1% of the global population within the wetland. Then lastly, you had the papyrus canaries, which were only 15 in the entire wetland. So what does it mean for us to have more than 1% of the global population being found in just a small wetland? Is that it calls for conservation, for protection, so that we don't lose out on what is currently there. So moving forward, I was also looking at the habitat quality of the wetland and comparing it with the abundance of the papyrus yellow warblers. And basically, I was considering the papyrus vegetation because it was the most abundant with the other vegetation types. Then also looking at the age of the vegetation, the mature versus immature, and also a healthy vegetation versus the one that is not healthy. And through that, most of the warblers, 87.4% of them were basically found in the papyrus vegetation, which was mature and also healthy. So that means that the papyrus yellow warblers thrive most in mature, healthy papyrus, whereas the vegetation which is degraded or immature supports fewer of them. So this is key to their survival, and conserving such a wetland would be so good for us to have more of these papyrus yellow warblers multiplying. About the habitat quality, what I was specifically assessing was whether it was not disturbed vis-a-vis what was disturbed. So whatever was disturbed, for example, the burnt papyrus, as you can see in the lower pictures, where the vegetation was burnt. And also on the right, you could see in the corner, you could see that a whole stretch of wetland was burnt. And you could ask yourself, now where did these birds go if a whole stretch is burnt? Also looking at the human impact, I considered three aspects: farmland, tree plantation, and settlements. And these were just activities that are 250 meters around the wetland. And with the study, the findings were that most of the papyrus shallow warblers were found near the farmlands, whereas very few were found near settlements. So this calls for a conservation agency, knowing that however much the warblers were found near farmland areas compared to settlements, it means that there is need to promote sustainable organic farming to balance agriculture and biodiversity, so that we keep on protecting the birds that are in the wetlands. So looking at the habitat quality and human impact, as you can see in the pictures on the left, is that when people are preparing gardens for growing their crops, some of them usually spray with herbicides to dry up the vegetation and also encroaching on part of the wetlands. So as they do that, then they are also affecting the birds, the presence of the birds in the wetland, because the birds also feed on some of the insects that are always moving within this vegetation. And as you can see, the impact of agriculture is that you could see that there are some gardens that have been set up near the wetlands, and this is a great impact to the birds that stay in this kind of vegetation, that call it its home. So now that is why we are the true guardians of the vegetation or of wetlands. Much as birds are indicators because they signal the health of wetlands, there's nothing much they can do to save their home or the wetlands. So it is us, the people, the communities, the policymakers, the conservationists, that are the real guardians. So it is our actions that matter. Whether we conserve these wetlands or whether we degrade them, all this determines the survival of biodiversity that survives on the wetlands. So it is our shared responsibility. And by protecting and using these wetlands sustainably, we can ensure that both the birds and communities thrive. So this was just a baseline which needs continuous monitoring. It is the first comprehensive baseline for papyrus birds in that wetland where I collected the data. And this provides reference data for population trends, habitat quality, and human impacts. So this enables long-term monitoring to detect change and guide conservation action. So what could be the strategy towards KBA designation? So since the wetland has some patches that are healthy and mature, and also contains a lot of biodiversity, including the birds that acted as indicators, and also looking at the wetland having so many endemic species, and also having one of them, the Papyrus yellow warbler, meeting the threshold of the KBA criteria, having at least 1%, over 1% of the global population. So it would be good to recognize such wetlands, because this would strengthen conservation and protection, and it would also encourage sustainable land use planning, as well as creating opportunities for ecotourism and community benefits. So with this, Like I said, we need to do long-term monitoring since for that specific wetland, it was just a baseline. We have baseline data. So long-term monitoring is really needed, but I can't do it alone, or we can't do it alone. We need to also, we cannot rely on researchers alone, but we need to also involve other people. Maybe that is where citizen science approaches come in. Maybe because they could sustain monitoring, for example, using the eBird checklists, community-based monitoring, and maybe training local bird guides. And I believe that this could build both conservation outcomes and local ownership. And with the Nigerian Bird Atlas project, I feel that we need to share, they need to share with us and also maybe share with us their expertise on how to apply this citizen science in terms of the landscape. Because as you could see that even when the wetlands are burnt, even when they cut the vegetations, there is always hope for regeneration. The vegetation always regenerates. So this could be your next project. It could start from here because there is always hope for regeneration. So this is a call to action. Science and people, together we can save such kind of wetlands. For the policymakers, if they could recognize such wetlands as key biodiversity areas, and then also working together with conservationists who are passionate and my fellow researchers who could support habitat restoration and continuous monitoring. But also we need the communities. The communities, the people around these wetlands are the ones who mostly utilize the resources or the ecosystem services that are got from these wetlands. So if they could adopt sustainable practices, then we would have the wetlands stay, we would have the birds stay, but also us benefiting from them. So this is a call to action also with other partners to share their expertise in terms of monitoring such species. So it is really good to have a feeling of the birds in such an environment. This is a short video of the call of the papyrus yellow warbler in its papyrus vegetation. So if we act as true guardians of wetlands, the birds will continue to sing for us and for the generations to come. But also, if we save their habitat, then we also save ourselves because we need these wetlands and they also need us too. So as I close this presentation, uh, I would like to acknowledge Kabale University, where I did my MSc, and Cebu project that sponsored the research, including my supervisors who also supportive into coming up with this work. Dr. Fiona Mtekanga, the late Professor Sarah Nacha, Dr. Julius Adindito, and Professor Ilya, who also enabled me to analyze these findings. Thank you very much for listening.